Today, I am going to offer you 10 considerations for measuring spread and endurance of educational innovations. So this is a consolidation of 15 years of thinking about this in different contexts and conditions and measuring implementation and learning from others in other fields. So I'm just going to give you some big ideas. Number 10 consideration. It's essential to be clear about what you mean by endurance. I use the word endurance more than sustainability these days. We cannot assume that we're talking about the same thing. In fact, it's far more likely that we're not. So I'm going to share with you my working definition of sustainability, endurance. The ability of a program to maintain core beliefs and values and use them to guide adaptations to changes and pressures over time. Change takes an enormous amount of time. Implementation of complex interventions, you all know this, it takes an enormous amount of time. These are pictures of the Toyota RAV4 over time. Basically what they've done here is they kept the essential core, right? And they've removed and improved the ineffective and obsolete. And that's what I mean about evolution over time. Some people who work in health and mental health at UCLA, Edelman and Taylor, they talk about the valued functions of an intervention and how you have the structures of an intervention, and the structures are like the shells for the valued functions that happen within those structures. And it's the valued functions that you want to continue on. And when the structures are no longer supporting the operation of those functions, which in theory lead to the outcomes you want, you change the structures, right? You adapt them. 9. Innovations don't replicate, they translate. I really believe this. I know we were just hearing earlier about finding things that work so we can replicate them. But in my experience in the K-12 setting, I pretty confidently can say that I've never seen an innovation replicate. They're always adapted, always. So this informs our perspective on measurement. Some of you were talking about fidelity, right? And how do you measure fidelity? So in order to measure fidelity, you have to know what is and what was intended. And then fidelity is the extent to which there's a difference between those two things. The key is identifying those elements of the intervention that are critical, right? Critical, and by that I mean those that are leading to the outcomes we want. What we try to do is promote what we call principled adaptations, right? So we don't want adaptations to be random. We don't want them to be circumstantial. We want them to be principled, so that they still maintain the core beliefs and values, but will actually maybe even help the intervention work better. Number 8, it's necessary to specifically describe the innovation or the intervention. One of the first things we do when we sit down with our client is we say, okay, what are you trying to do? And they'll offer a list of structures, what we would call structures. Well, we're doing this and this and this and this and this and this. And then we say, okay, and why is it that you expect that this is going to lead to the outcomes you want? That also illustrates that fundamentally what the intervention is, right? Any intervention is a reflection of the developer's beliefs and values, right? Which may be fully based, well informed by research, right? Their beliefs and values about how they're going to get the outcomes they want. Dissemination is not the same as spread, and spread takes many forms. We've had to work on our language within our group to better understand what that really means. Dissemination is just putting out. I'm disseminating right now. You can leave here and completely forget and ignore everything I said, and it will not have been scaled. And that's a lot of what most people mean when they talk about scale. A lot of people think of scaling as expansion. But even then, it's like, well, is it like expanding exponentially? Like, or is it just movement from one classroom to another? Is that scale up? Like, how much is scale up? How much expansion is scale up? And if it doesn't go up a level, let's say, so if there's a practice in a classroom and it just goes classroom to classroom to classroom, but it never makes the jump to other schools, is that scale up? Or is that just spread or movement? What is it? There's no single answer to that question, and it really doesn't much matter how I define those things, but the point is that you need to define them. Spread happens when dissemination and adoption meet. It's very easy to measure dissemination, very difficult to measure spread, because in our definition, spread means that somebody has actually adopted a practice. All right, consider that individuals don't adopt practices only because they're effective. Yeah, so this I think is one of the biggest problems in education, truly. Right, so let's find what works and scale it up. It seems simple until you turn that mirror back on yourself and say, how many things that are really good for me do I do? And why not? Right, and some of those reasons are legitimate. Like some of them are just excuses, but some of them are good, really good reasons. Like I hear people all the time, evaluators, researchers, go, why aren't teachers doing this? Because it's really good. And I go, why should they? Right? And you know, it's hard to come up with an answer for that. Right? Oh, because it's good for kids, really? You know, and then you have to get into in this context or condition. So it's important to remember, it's one of the reasons. It's effectiveness is an awesome reason to try something. It's the best reason. Right? We're getting back into the efficacy and effectiveness testing. So hey, if something's gone through an efficacy trial or effectiveness study and it works, great. Let's try it and see how it operationalizes in natural settings. Let's talk about what does it mean to be effective. 15 years ago, I found this. And it's this program in Australia to get Australians to use sunscreen. It was taking like 20 years for people to change their behavior. When people ask me why it's so hard to change things in educational settings, like I think about this and I go, okay, let's see, sunscreen prevents skin cancer, which will kill you. It's so easy to use and keep yourself from getting a disease that will kill you. And it takes 20 years. Consider that many factors influence implementation, spread, and sustainability. It's a big idea. So we've studied this a lot, and other people have studied this a lot. And some of you have brought up a lot of these factors, and we've grouped them, and we measure them. And there's ways to group them and measure them, and there's a lot to be learned from other fields as well. Consider that characteristics of the innovation itself influence implementation, spread, and sustainability. Implementation is used in a moment. What's the status of implementation right now? And the factors that influence those things in our work is the same set of factors. Like this list, I didn't show you the whole long, there's like 40 of them, right, of these factors. But they influence these things at different times, in different ways. Some are more important than others, right? Some are more important when you're launching something. Some are more important when something's been in place for 5 years or 10 years. Some change with the context and conditions, right? Like there's competing initiatives. When somebody's doing something new to them, even though it's not new to the world, it's an innovation for them. And consider that fit is one way to tie this all together. So fit with current practice, fit with needs, and fit with values. You can really believe in something, but it may not fit with your needs. And sometimes that's very practical. I think there's a mindset that because somebody's not innovating, it's for bad reasons, right? But it's important to recognize that there are very real reasons that people might choose not to do something. And it's important to recognize it so that we can address it. All right, consider that you won't always want to have everything last. It will depend on the horizon, and take into account the timeline, data collection, thoughtful adaptation. These are the things that you might want to have last. The structures that I talked about, the interactions, or the outcomes. Here's the innovation, and here it is in pieces with those components like I was talking about, And here's the factors and all those factors and all those categories, organizational, environmental, the user, they're all right, and they all affect the implementation of the innovation, and it leads to our desired outcomes. But what happens over time, first of all, the factors all change and evolve. The innovation adapts, right? And so you can wrap your head around that. We don't know what materials to develop because those outcomes are changing and everything is moving. So it's very complicated. And we find that these frameworks, whether it's our list of factors, or our way of describing an innovation, or our commitment to clear language and clear conceptual understanding, these are our anchors that help us manage the turbulence. It all comes down to capacity and will. It's this simple. Everything I've just boils down to this. If you want something to last, everything you do should build capacity or will or both. In the short term or long term. This is where most people focus, short-term capacity. We're going to give them knowledge, we're going to give them tools. That's short-term. Oh, and I'll define capacity as organizational capacity, structural capacity, those are policies and practices, organizational capacity, organizational functions, financial capacity, money, resources, and human capacity, knowledge, skills, and expertise, right? So that's capacity. We don't focus so much on building will. Sometimes we build will in the short term by saying we're going to give you money, right? That's short term, but it doesn't build long-term will. And I mean, you actually need to direct activities to all of these, all of them. But if your activities aren't doing any of them, forget it. Or if your activities are only in one or two of these, you're not going to create something that's going to last. Right? So it's a very helpful tool working with a client who's doing something very complex over the long term in a large system. It's even helpful for something relatively small because it enables you to go, what do you want to have last? First of all, what do you want to have last? And then how are you going to build the capacity and the will so that it lasts? And in what sequence are you going to do that? So if you take nothing else away, right, just remember capacity and will.